I've played a lot of video games, and one of my favorite traits in a game is a good combat system. Fighting stuff is a large part of lots of single-player games, so the best games work hard to make the combat the best part. But what games have the greatest combat? Well, that's what this very subjective video is about. And before you ask, fighting games will not be counted on this list, as this is a list made to look at the best single-player games. But for you fighting game fans, stick around, because there's a little something waiting for you later in the video. Without further ado, let's hop into the list. Coming in at number 5 is Persona 5 Royal. While turn-based games have somewhat of a notorious reputation for being snooze fests, Persona 5 Royal is the standout of the genre, with a system so in-depth you forget how flawed the basis of it can be. P5R takes the typical RPG, hit enemy weakness and win, but boss have no weakness, and adds a lot of flavor. You see, when you hit a weakness, you get a 1 more, which essentially gives you an extra turn at no cost. You can then baton pass to a teammate, boosting their damage and giving them your extra turn. If you then hit a weakness with them, they can baton pass, setting up for a crazy powerful attack if done right. You don't even have to hit a weakness to start this either, as inflicting an enemy with a status ailment like Sleep or Burn gives you access to technical hits, doing extra damage and even knocking down enemies with ordinarily no weakness. There is also a very wide variety of skills, allowing you to make any kind of crazy build that you want. Do you want an almighty enemy shredder with no weakness? Go for it. An insane creep machine? You got it, partner. This is complemented by great boss design, with 9 of the major bosses all feeling unique and interesting to fight. Well, almost all of them. While I've never been much of a Souls-like gamer, spoilers for the rest of the list, Jedi Fallen Order is just so fun that I couldn't help but love it. This genre of combat feels oddly fitting for a game where you are a Jedi, and the difficulty is justified by Cal's fractured connection to the Force. The combat has a great feeling of progression, with you gradually upgrading both your Force and Saber skills and becoming a force to be reckoned with. Yeah, sorry. Getting good at the combat felt genuinely rewarding, as destroying groups of enemies without breaking a sweat is immensely satisfying, especially when they provided a lot of struggle earlier in the game. As you might see later in the list, I'm a big fan of challenging combat, especially when you have access to a parry. Parrying in Jedi Fallen Order feels great, because you can strike back with a powerful counterattack. The different types of force moves you have access to are pretty unique from each other in functionality, and actually support different playstyles and figuring out for yourself what works. Personally, I loved pushing enemies off cliffs, but that could just be me. Jedi Fallen Order provides a more accessible version of Dark Souls combat that many more can enjoy, including myself. The boss fights are also great, with each feeling just hard enough in relation to your progression. I love the combat of Jedi Fallen Order and hope its sequel, coming out soon, lives up to, and maybe even surpasses, its quality. At third place is Marvel's Spider-Man. And Miles Morales. Okay, it's kind of cheating, but they're basically the same game, and it's my list, so I'm counting them as one slot. There have been a lot of Spider-Man games over the years, but Insomniac knocked it out of the park with their interpretation of everyone's favorite webhead. Spider-Man takes a somewhat uncommon approach and includes a lot of aerial combat in the game. Spider-Man is just such a perfect hero for a video game. He feels great to play as. Taking out thugs by launching them around like they're made of feathers is crazy fun, and the game allows a lot of freedom with how you take out enemies. You can punch, kick, web, throw objects, throw enemies, use gadgets. It's pretty addicting. While recording footage for this game, I got sucked in and played a little longer than I needed to. The two games are slightly different, as Miles has less gadgets and no suit powers, but access to his Venom powers as well as suit mods lead to a unique but still familiar and similar combat system. It feels great to play as either Spider-Man, and I'm confident that the third game in the series is going to reach new heights of super satisfying combat. As it stands now, these games are some of the best superhero video games of all time, even though Spider-Man happens to sound exactly like Yosuke.
Which, oh dear, does that mean the real culprits are everyone on the outside, including you?
Only cowards assault a helpless person like that.
While recording footage for other games on this list, it took me a bit to get used to the game's combat after not playing for a while. but coming back to Batman Arkham Knight was like riding a bike. I have played this game so much that I know it like the back of my hand. The Arkham series' free-flow combat system is smooth like butter. It almost feels like a rhythm game, with successful combos being immensely satisfying and requiring good timing. You can't just mash buttons, because to get the optimal damage on enemies, you have to time your punches to be critical strikes. Arkham Knight polished the combat system to its absolute peak. Not only does Batman have an enormously varied moveset with access to a crazy amount of gadgets, almost all of them having a unique use in combat, but in AR challenges you have access to a whopping 8 playable characters. While Azrael and Batgirl are unfortunately just copies of Batman with fewer gadgets, Robin, Nightwing, Catwoman, Harley Quinn, and Red Hood all have unique movesets. Arkham Knight's combat is so good that even I was a little surprised that it didn't end up in the number 1 slot. It was very hard to decide between my number 1 and number 2 picks, but when you see my number 1, you'll probably understand. At the very respectable second place, Arkham Knight is definitely a must-play, and one of my favorite games of all time. Well, fighting game fans, if you stuck around, now's your time, because a lot of the honorable mentions are just that. Like I said in the intro, I've played a whole lot of games, and narrowing it down to just 5 was a pretty tough task, ultimately leading to me choosing not to include fighting games, but I wanted to mention them here. The best traditional fighters I've played are Mortal Kombat 11 and Injustice 2. The best platform fighters are Smash Ultimate and Rivals of Aether, but Multiversus was fun for a while too. Unfortunately, I am awful at most fighting games, so I can't really get into games like Tekken and Street Fighter, but I'm sure they could have made it onto this list in another life. There's really too many genres to cover. Stuff like roguelikes, shooters. Can you really call that combat on the same level as anything else on this list? Maybe you could, but I couldn't make the decision, so they did not show up on this list. Well, now that you know what the game is, let's get some hype music. God of War and its sequel Ragnarok are some of the best gaming experiences that I've ever had. Even outside of the focus of this list, the story, graphics, and just everything else about the game are incredible. But, as you may have figured out, the combat is my favorite part by far. While in some other games you have one weapon to defend yourself, or even none, Ragnarok gives you access to a whopping 3 different weapons, as well as unarmed combat, with an emphasis on switching between them depending on the foe. Not only do all 3 weapons have their own skill trees, they each have a slot for a heavy and light runic attack, a powerful attack with a cooldown. In addition to this, you also have a companion with access to a runic summon, as well as providing supporting fire against any beasts you may be facing. While you might think that having so many weapons is pointless because clearly one must be the best, this is actually not true. Each weapon has its own uses in combat as well as puzzles. The Leviathan Axe excels in single target and range damage, the Blades of Chaos specialize in powerful crowd control and mobility, and the Dropnir Spear provides a somewhat jack-of-all-trades coverage as well as special elemental damage if you siphon it from an enemy. Every weapon feels brutal and satisfying to use, and I found myself using all of them a pretty similar amount during the first playthrough of this game. Oh, and did I mention that you also have access to Spartan Rage, a short period of immense anger and power to strike down your enemies, or Spartan Valor, a quick heal that also provides a damage boost if timed with an opponent's strike, or Spartan Fury, a single powerful attack with your currently held weapon? Well, if it's not obvious, God of War Ragnarok's combat system is incredibly in-depth and is the best I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing in a game, which is why it got the number 1 spot on the list. Seriously, everyone should play this game at least once. It's unforgettable. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree with my list, leave a like if you liked it, and subscribe for more content in the future. See ya!
Look how far we've gone.